to sit with me to talk about healing. This is something that has been at the top of my story since day one, and it's taken me a long time to reach a point where I could put words to what has been for me a very organic, intuitive process, almost a nonverbal movement of my soul from the time I was a child until now. And so to put words to it is something that has taken me a long time, and sharing this out loud as I am today is the first time that I've ever put it out there in this way. I started writing a little book to go with the conversations I have with people in groups privately as a takeaway, so that the words that are spoken have some lasting impression as they leave with the people that I work with. And as I was writing the book, I got to about 30 pages or so, and I was like, heck, this is just a PowerPoint presentation turned into a book. And then I thought, well, maybe I need to deliver it as a PowerPoint. Maybe I need to deliver it in a visual format first, and then the pieces of the book that were still waiting to be revealed would come forward. So today is as much about helping me finish the book as it is sharing this out loud. And they say the best way to learn something is to teach it. So I am definitely somebody who continues to learn even as I teach. Teaching is something that's been with me for a very, very long time. It is part of my purpose in this life, to be a bridge, to build a bridge of words from one understanding to another. And so it is with that that I begin this process. I'm going to ask everyone to just close their eyes for just a moment and breathe with me, because you know that breath is where everything begins. And as we breathe together at the top of every hour, we're reminded that we're not alone on this journey to consciousness, to the awakening that is before us. As we breathe together throughout that hour, we're reminded that everything we do in this life is to be ceremonial, that we honor the sacredness of the human experience, that we show up fully and completely in the human experience. And in doing so, we offer our greatest light to ourselves and those around us. And so it is with that as my opening that I share with you that this is my greatest light, that it's taken me a very long time to bring this out into the world without fear that I will be diminished in some way in doing so. About a year ago, I was in ceremony, and I was told at that time that I needed to learn to stand in my truth without shame. And at the time, that felt so personal. But as I realized watching the news just this morning, we all have to learn to stand in our truth without shame. That there are forces in the world that would have us be shamed for believing what we do, and that is that we are here for something far better than how we're showing up as a human species. And so please set aside any fear you have about being a part of a conversation that operates at such a high frequency. This is the time where we really do need to stand in our truth and hold that truth in the light that it is. The healing conversation began a long time ago. I was about, just shy of my 4th birthday, and I remember a night my parents were fighting. I can place it, sort of a time stamp of it, because I can feel the warmth of the sidewalk on my back and my legs, and also the coolness of the breeze. So it was like, had to be October, and my birthday's in November. So I know I was just shy of 4, and we were basically hiding outside, not the hide and seek sort of hiding, but the hiding that happens when parents fight and children feel threatened in those environments. And that night I remember asking existential questions of, why am I here? What is this about? Because I realized that the safety that I was seeking as a child had to come from inside. Safety is an inside job. And in doing so, I began to connect with a part of myself that I'm going to call my soul awareness. I became aware of a part of myself that wasn't seen to others. I began a dialogue with that inner part of myself that now I would call my oversoul, my highest self. There's lots of terminology for this, but I think everybody can relate to the voice inside their head. And then they can also relate to the person who's listening to the voice inside their head. And I became aware of that at a very early age because I was somebody who started off with a clear wound. Not everybody's wounding is as pronounced as mine was, and I'm grateful that I can look back to being molested as an infant and know that that's when I lost my innocence. That's when I began the separation from knowing that we are all one to being an individual. And this happens to every single human on the planet. It's baked in to the human experience. Mine was pronounced enough that it created the ability to see my life from an observer standpoint. And some would call that a dissociative state. It's how therapists refer to that. I now have begun to understand that more as a way of keeping myself whole but safe in an unsafe environment. And at age 4, I became very aware of this. My mother would report many times to other people. She would always ask me what infinity is and what does eternal mean and why are we here? And she asks questions like a grown-up, and she's just a little kid. I mean, my mom would say that over and over again to the point where those types of questions became shameful. And I stopped asking those questions, but I still maintained this inner dialogue with this oversoul part of myself that was very wise. And I would sit up many nights giving speeches to the world about what was wrong with the world. I knew that my parents' fighting was not in our true nature. I knew that the way that my father, his energy operated around girls was not normal. I knew these things intuitively. It's like I always had this acute sense of justice in the world, what was right, what was real, what was fair. Most of the people that I interact with these days in the world of consciousness can relate to that. Perhaps everyone listening can relate to a core of knowing that things are not as they should be in the world right now. In April of 2000, I clearly wrote into my life script a big wake-up call, because after being a mother with 4 kids, and I went from Catholic to evangelical Christian to Mormon, the first 35 years of my life were spent steeped in a theory of everything that created more fear in the world and less love in the world. And so, as any wise writer would, they would write into their story a conflict, something that would arise that would wake me up enough to start to pursue my higher self. And so I invite people, when I work with them privately, and you, as you listen to this, to think about those anchor moments in your life when you can say, this was a moment where everything shifted. The 4-year-old memory is an anchor moment. The day in April of 2000 that I had a pulmonary embolism and died is an anchor moment. It was a time when I began to really question what my higher purpose was. I was in that near-death experience place where I felt bathed in love and light. There were no heaven and hell, no glory, degrees of glory, and of course all my heavy religious training and 15 years of teaching Sunday school, none of that matched up to what I experienced in that near-death moment. And I was given a choice. Did I really want to come back here and live, or was I done? And only recently has that choice made sense to me. If I think about it, living the life I was living, it was pretty good. I had a wonderful relationship with Stephen. We were 5 years into our marriage, and and kids, and life was great. But golly, I'll tell you, when you are bathed in love and light, why would you ever want to go back? But I did. I wanted to come back. I wanted to consent to the human experience fully and completely. And so I lay that as a foundation, because that's where we're going to end up today, asking that question: do we really want to fully be here in the human experience? And in order to say yes to that, we have to go through a whole series of questions, and perhaps more unpacking of our story. And so April 2000, pulmonary embolism, died, came back, committed to figuring out who I was. But it wasn't until 14 years later, in fact, 2 days from now, 5 years ago, that my mother passed away. And she and I always had this conversation that, you know, if you get to the other side and you have some way of letting me know that there's a there, I would appreciate it. And so on the day she died, she did show me in multiple ways. I won't go into the detail now, but she did show me that there is a there by contacting me very directly. I'll tell you one. She died on Thursday morning. I did all my work at the hospital to say goodbye as, you know, the keeper of her well-being. And then I came home that afternoon, and I had a huge journey that day. That journey completely expanded my awareness of who I was. I opened up to a channel, is what I called it at the time, because I didn't really understand what it was. A voice came to and through me that didn't shut up, and hasn't shut up for the last 5 years. So much so that I record these sessions, and I have hours and hours and hours of recordings of downloads, things that I look back on now and they feel very prophetic to me. That first one in July of 14 was about storytelling. And they said there will come a point very soon where lies will become reality and reality will become lies, and you will not know what truth is anymore. Now keep in mind, this is before the 2016 election. That recording about storytelling being the way that we would hold the essence of our truth alive in the world, that it would fly under the radar of those who seek to control the narrative that we consume. And so you see now this expansion of storytelling in movies and art and music and poetry, and this is a story that I'm telling you. This healing conversation is a story about how I've been shown to heal not just myself, but to create a bridge for others to do the same. And so that recording was so profound that I feel like my mom got to the other side and flipped a switch and said, okay, it's time, she's ready. And the next day, about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, my mom came to me, and this is how I know there's a there. My mom was a hospital administrator, an RN, and she, in her most efficient terminology, she said, they forgot me in the morgue. I was like, what? It was like, they forgot me in the morgue. And I called the hospital, and yes, indeed, they had forgotten her. Neptune Society didn't arrive, hadn't captured her up in its process yet. And so all that to say, that was a big day. When my mom died, and the 48 hours after that, where she became more present in my life than she had ever been alive. That was an anchor moment in my life. The night of the election, I was in Kansas. My hard drive died. My luggage was lost. I was about to go speak to a group of people who I knew had voted differently than I had that day. And I was recognizing that I would have to really hold my ego in check and not punish them for who they voted for. And as I waited for my bags to arrive and my colleague to bring me a backup computer so I could have something to present with for the next 3 days, I took a little medicine that night, and I got this huge download when I saw Pennsylvania go in a direction I never thought was possible. I stayed awake the rest of that night thinking, how can I stand up in front of these people for the next 3 days and show up in love? How do I show up in love? And I was shown that we have to look beyond what people voted for to what their core motivators are, what unites us, not divides us. And so the next morning when one of the gentlemen approached me, knowing full well that I was the one who had my ego smashed the night before, he said, "Are you okay?" And I said, actually, I'm not. I'm really concerned about the welfare of our country and the world at large. And I said, "Can I ask you a question?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "What did you vote for? I don't care who you voted for yesterday, but what did you vote for?" And it was disarming. And he said, "I voted for the Farm Belt. I voted because I feel like we're left behind. I feel like we're the ones who, do all the heavy lifting of getting food on the table." And of course, I thought, have you been to California? Have you looked at how much food? But, that's ego. That's my story. And so I just voice kept coming to me, find the connection point, find the connection point. And so I did. I found that I could agree that I want them to feel job security and economic security as well as I do. And I said, I can support you in that. And I said, now, can I ask you a favor? If you find that the person you voted for does not deliver what you wanted him to vote, what your vote went for, would you let me know? Honestly, intellectually, no judgments, I just have a really bad feeling about this guy. And 3 months later, when I went back for the next round of training with them, he took me aside and he goes, "I'm disappointed already." And I said, "Okay, I can meet you there." And it became a really honest dialogue instead of he's wrong, I'm right, none of that. What became important is that we got on the same side of the issue and decided that we would continue to fight for what is good in this country together. Now, I wish it was that simple and having that kind of a conversation with everyone would come that easily. But it opened up something in me that really began to take wing at that point. My old life had to be shut down in order for me to give this expression its fullness, and that took a couple of years to do that. Meanwhile, the downloads just kept coming, and more and more pieces of the healing conversation came forward. And now, because of the blessing of a ruptured Achilles, I've had months to sit so quietly, listen to the stillness, listening to the voice that wanted to be heard all this time, but I just never could create enough spaciousness or have enough trust in the truth that comes from within in favor, giving it more credibility, more believability than the truth that comes from without. But as everything around me has continued to disappoint in the world, it's becoming more clear that we can only trust that which is inside of us. And so with that, I offer the healing conversation as a bridge, a way of finding connection with people and situations that feel so foreign to us, we don't even want to look at them. But it's really our own shadow that we're shying away from in that movement. And we cannot be afraid of this shadow. We have to understand it and give it a new context in order for all of us to heal, not just individually, but collectively. One of the core mantras of my life has been that life happens for me, not to me. And if you think about that statement, it's such a simple statement, but it changes everything in terms of whether you see your life as a student versus a victim. And I could have easily gone down the path of victim. I had a lot of early trauma compounded by inappropriateness throughout my young woman years. And the details are not as important now because I understand the lessons. It's not critical to relive the detail. And I think that's what's been paramount in my healing. One of my mentors said early on that life is all about meaning making. And when he first said that, that felt really strange to me, like meaning making, like I get to decide what everything means. And he'd look at me and go, yeah, it really is that simple, that we come here to live a human experience and to create a meaning around that experience that makes it meaningful, that makes it wonderful, that makes it holy. Or we can attach other beliefs to what happens to us and become victims, or we become perpetrators because we were victimized. I mean, the whole human story could shift if we could all just understand that this is one great tableau of experience upon which we get to create meaning for that experience. And so from a very early age, I've understood that it's a lesson. That went in direct opposition to the Christian, Catholic, Mormon ideologies that I had been immersed in, and thus the reason why I had to leave them behind. At age 35, I just said, enough. This is dividing, it's not uniting. And so with that as a backstory, I began to live my life from a very curious, divine perspective, that life happens for me, not to me. And so the healing conversation has always felt like it's both for me, but it's also for anyone else who can hold that view of their human experience, that it is a storybook of lessons that we get to live out. And often we only understand the true lessons after the fact. But what if we could begin to unpack them while we're right in the middle of them? What if instead of waiting until we're in our 50s and 60s and 70s, looking back on our life and seeing the patterns that we had to repeat until we learned the lesson that was embedded into that pattern? What if we didn't have to wait so long to have that rocking chair perspective on what really mattered in our life? What if we could get to that now instead of waiting? Well, that's what the healing conversation has really come forward to bring into the light. I began to experiment with the healing conversation when I went on my walkabout last year with my little motorhome. I would drive into RV parks, walk up to total strangers, invite myself to sit down with them by their fire, and I would have the healing conversation with them. And I knew a lot of them had voted for things that I could agree with, but are now disappointed by how they're being undelivered, if you will. And so it was without ever bringing up politics, without ever bringing up names of humans. We could talk instead about what was really important to us as human beings in the human experience. And there were some beautiful healings that happened. I mean, this one guy looked at me and he goes, I kind of figured I would not like you when you walked over here because I kind of looked like a hippie, right? But in that way, he said, I'm really enjoying this conversation. And so I began to gain in confidence about having this conversation. It was easier with total strangers. It's hard with people that know you because they see you a certain way, and I see myself a certain way in a reflection in their eyes. And so it was so much easier. I had nothing to lose. I could get in my vehicle and drive away if it became uncomfortable. I had lots of options for escape from my own insecurities around showing up with this message in the world. But as I did it, more and more I realized, boy, I got nothing to lose. And so in one of my beautiful downloads, I got this visual of me sitting in the middle of a town in the middle of Kansas or anywhere with a sign that says, "Are you ready for the healing conversation?" And I thought, oh, I mentioned it to Stephen, and he said, "Could we not do it in any town? Is there some way you can do this online so that you don't put yourself physically at risk?" And it's sad that it felt like such a risky thing, but I agreed not to put myself at risk like that. Not yet. That day will come. But in the meantime, it's clear that there are a lot of people, the fact that you're on this call or listening to this, there are a lot of people just like me who are seeing this moment that we're living in as an existential awakening, as a shift in the way that we begin to prioritize resources and people on this planet. These are the people that this message is supposed to come to first, that we begin to heal our own pieces, so that we're ready to help be in service to healing those around us who are not as far along on this path to what we'll call an awakening, if you will. And so the choice right now that is resting in my belly, and I think resting in your bellies, is that the choice that we have in front of us is to heal our timeline. And what I mean by that, the timeline is our human story from the very beginning. To recognize that, if you look at a human in its innocence, before it has been corrupted by abuse or neglect or, we'll just leave it at abuse and neglect. Before that, our innocence is such that we were bright and curious and artistic or engineering minded, all the things, the parts of ourselves that we've damped down because somebody told us it didn't fit in the model that we were supposed to be living. To heal our timeline so that we can return to that level of fullness, that level of expression in the world, is what's necessary to move us out of the fear and the darkness that we are shrouded in right now. So we have to heal our personal timelines, and in doing so, we begin to heal the collective timeline. And so the healing conversation is about that. How do we heal our timeline? How do we shift ourselves out of the lens of fear into the lens of love? And ultimately, we reattach, we reconnect with our own inner guidance system, our sacred guidance system that tells us what's true and what's not. That our inner knowing becomes stronger than the external voices that are trying to control us. And to get to that level of internal trust, we have to so deeply fall in love with ourselves. And in doing so, heal ourselves so that we can begin to trust ourselves completely and fully as our guidance system in a world that's going to become increasingly more chaotic. So the first question of the healing conversation is, are you ready for the healing conversation? And the irony of that is that question alone is worthy of a day's worth of conversation. Just unpack that. And so it takes time to really feel into our readiness, our willingness to be healed. We have to learn to really trust the wisdom of our bellies, the wisdom of our intuition, the wisdom of our highest knowing, that's always there for us, but that, as a young child, it's usually squelched or squashed or in some way diminished, that we stop trusting. Our boundaries are violated. Somebody tells us our truth is not real, and we begin to doubt ourselves. We begin to doubt that inner guidance system and second guess ourselves. And this becomes such a perpetual default that we end up making choices based on how others need to see us rather than how we really truly are in the world. So this movement is about making the choice to make love with our story, to make love, to create love in our story, to create meaning about our story that only brings love forward. Because love is all there is. And I'm going to talk about that in terms of the human operating system. We know biologically that our bodies will not thrive. They will not survive. We as a species will not survive if we do not reconnect to our love. Because if you think about it, the human body is amazing. It has appetites for oxygen, for water, for nourishment. And one piece of that is not physiological, but it is the bridge that unites us to our existential knowing that there's something more to this story. We are not just instinctual animals. We are sentient beings. We only thrive in an environment where we are met, where we are seen, where we are loved. Our biological DNA defaults to love as our survival mechanism. Babies fail to thrive without love and connection. Humans, as a species, we fail to thrive, which is where we're at right now on the planet, because we've lost our connection to our inner knowing of who we are and what our soul is really about. We're here to love. Love is our source code. It only knows one movement, and that is expansion. And so it will continue to expand and expand and expand, following our free will, because that's what love is. It allows us to feel into our truth to the point where we will eventually reach a point where we are so broken. Our constructs of safety and power will have so failed us that we'll be ready at that point to take on a new construct. One of the things that has become really clear to me is I've had depression all my life. Well, until the last few years, where I finally looked at depression and said, oh, this is just my existential warning bell going off saying, warning, Mr. What is it, from danger, Will Robbins, danger, that's my internal mechanism saying, you're out of alignment. Depression is just being out of alignment. And I was clinically depressed. I had years of antidepressants. But once I was able to unpack that, I realized what a gift that depression was, because it kept me forever looking inward. Why am I sad? Why am I not happy? Why am I disappointed by all these things happening around me? And it was only because I led that from the perspective of student versus victim. I led that query from that perspective of student. I began to go deeper and deeper and deeper into knowing what that story was all about. It was in service to me finally waking up to my own healing process and taking charge of that healing process by creating meaning around what had happened to me. And ultimately, I saw everything in my story, everything in my personal timeline, as a breadcrumb to my soul, a piece of myself showing up in a meaningful way that it grabbed my attention. It became an anchor point. And so where we're at right now is we're in this place of utter chaos, social, economic, Pachamama, the earth, everything's in chaos. And it is in that state of chaos that we begin to find our own rhythm. We are not so easily torn about by the chaos, because to stay engaged with the chaos is death. And our human operating system can't function in that state of chaos, that state of separation. It will continually draw itself back into a state of love. And so the more chaos, the more we go inward to figure this shit out. And so right now, what's happening in the world, most people watch the news and they become super depressed and angry and rageful. And it doesn't matter which side you're on. Both sides have got their dog in the fight. But when you hold the perspective that this is a movement that's bringing us home to ourselves, In fact, one of the downloads was, if you imagine a boomerang, and I'm a little ahead of myself, you'll see me reference this later, but I'm in flow. And so here we go. So the boomerang, picture how it goes out and it comes back. Well, that's the whole human story. We go out with amnesia. We don't know who we are. We're just spinning out there. We're just sort of figuring out who we are as a species. But because we don't remember who we are, we're subject to fear, because we got saber-toothed tigers coming at us. We've got to, elevate the masculine to protect the feminine. We've got role distinctions now for safety. But as we've evolved as a species, we don't have saber-toothed tigers. We're safe. We've got Maslow's bottom rung figured out. We can do this. We know how to take care of ourselves on this planet. We've learned a lot, but we let that get ourselves so far from our inner knowing of who we are. We've become subject to what happens all around us instead of being still and present in our own knowing that all is well. Even as crazy as it is right now, all is exactly as it needs to be, to break down the old constructs, the old institutions that are fear-based, in order for love to move forward. So here's the picture of the boomerang with me. So it's going and it's going, and in order for it to come back, and I almost thought about including this video here, but just Google how a boomerang works, and the physics, the science, the math involved with flipping that boomerang to come back to us is called gyrational torque. And there's lift, there's a differential in lift, which means it's unbalanced, which means it's going to wobble itself back into its own correction to come back home to itself. I mean, just the metaphorical analogy here between the boomerang and the human condition is, to me, a reason why the Aboriginals are the oldest humans on the earth. They understand this model of returning home to us. So we are at the point where it's spinning so fast right now. And if you are not grounded in your inner guidance system, you are not grounded in your personal theory of everything, you are subject to this massive fear-based response to all the shift that's happening around us, instead of a love-based response with bring it on. It's all in service to us becoming so destabilized in our curse of certainty about how things should be in the world, that we begin to ask different questions about who we are and how we're supposed to show up on this planet. And it's happening so fast right now, and it's happening because Greta Thunberg and Jason Silva and all these young voices are finding the volume. They're opening up their throat chakra and saying enough, and they're bringing the light and the truth forward right now in storyteller fashion. They're telling the story of what's going to happen to us if we don't wake up. The facts and figures back it up, but it's the story of human loss. It's the story of grief that we are self-imposing right now that is waking people up slowly but surely. So the human operating system defaults to love. Fear is a malware. It is a virus. It is contagious. And so we gotta wake up and get to this healing conversation fast, because without it, we are going to lose ourselves in this spin, in this gyrational torque that is in service to bringing us home, but we don't have to suffer in the meantime. And so knowing that everything, as dark as it is, as shadowy as it is in service to waking up the shadow in us to finally find our voice, makes it all very curious and not so scary and interesting. And you begin to see the nuance of movements between this politician and that story and this movement, and you begin to get that sort of 5D perspective of where all the threads are, the fabric that is Mike Mead gives a beautiful talk. He says, we're not coming to the end times. That's a very Christian theory of everything. He says, we're already in the end times. End does not mean like a cutoff, like an amputation. End is like a fray of fabric, that the loose ends of things are fraying. The fabric of our society has been unraveling for a very, very, very long time. And it's the weavers and the storytellers and those who are awake and standing in their light without any shame that begin to weave a new story, that begin to build a new Achilles. Where there were no threads to be put back together, I kept picturing beautiful golden braid forming in my leg. And I mean, truly, I'm doing things that nobody thought I was going to be able to do with this body. And all I can tell you is that holy braid is a reweaving of what I was left with. And that's exactly what we're living out right now in this time, is we're reweaving a holy braid. And those of us who are weavers, and if you're listening to my voice and any of this resonates, you are a weaver. You are somebody who has got a hold of a loose end, and you have some piece that you're supposed to bring to this new fabric of who we are. And we're all sitting in our homes behind computers, scared to death to own this truth, scared to death to show up in that knowing that we are here to weave a beautiful new tapestry of human experience, one that has removed the malware of fear, one that is it only knows expansion. There's so much room for everybody to weave into this fabric. There is no scarcity, there is only abundance. And so there are three pieces of this conversation that we all have to agree to. First of all, to trust your inner guidance system as we go into these conversational questions, to know that your soft belly can discern the truth more than your mind. So just let your mind take a break for a while. And that's, when I do these with people and everybody's on medicine state, that's a given, and it's beautiful. And Cannabis is the great integrator. She is the one that has opened up all of this process to me, and she is the one who is on board now. And notice how Cannabis is rising across the planet as a holy plant that for thousands of years has been sacred, and only since we began to lose our ways, lose our humanity over the last 70 years, has she been demonized. And so she is the rise of the feminine and the rise of light, and she's already in everybody's body. Well, most everybody. There's a few people who've never touched Cannabis, but if you've even been in the vicinity of her, she's a spirit that goes everywhere. She is a weed. And so she is the great unifier right now. And so although there's a lot of other plant medicines that are for the deep inner work, Cannabis is the great integrator, and mushrooms too, as it turns out, has a play in this as well. So go with the soft belly today. Bring your curious mind. Ask more questions of this process. This is your path, your journey. I am not here to tell you what is true. I am here to tell you to go figure out what is true. And then don't worry about answering the questions as they come up. Trust that the questions answer themselves with more questions. And so this is a very Socratic approach. This is a very empowered approach to finding your light versus telling you what is true. I want to show you a path of inquiry so that you can discover for yourself what is true. So here are the questions. They seem pretty straightforward, Are you ready for the healing conversation? Well, as you'll see in a moment as I go through each of these questions, the unpacking of these questions shows up in a way that you begin to appreciate the subtlety of the wording in these questions. These are not my questions. I've tried for the last 5 years to write these down a dozen different ways that I thought seemed more, clever, perhaps. But it's only when I began to really surrender to the questions one by one in my own healing process that I understood how important they are. And so the first one, are you ready? Oh boy, 2 parts to that one, and we'll break that one out in a moment. The next one is, do you believe we can live in harmony? You'd think the answer would be so self-evident, but it's not, and we'll go there. This one, number 3, is probably the hardest one. Do you know what you believe and believe what you know? And so we're going to have to make some really important distinctions about 2 words in that question, the word believe and know. And so this is where your inner guidance system is going to be on high alert. And I invite that. I want that level of skepticism in this conversation. You need to query everything so that all the questions of your soul are answered in this process. Take a breath with me. It's the top of the hour. And now we just invited in all the souls who are breathing along with us at this point. The breath is also part of this conversation, because when we're not in presence with one another, we need some way to remember who we are in relation to one another, and the breath and the app that's being developed to go with this is a part of that. So then we get through that level of query, and we end up with the question, do we love ourselves enough to heal? And that's a hard one, because that means we really do have to fall in love with ourselves. And then finally, what is your role in the healing conversation? How do we move forward from there here? And so when I'm working with people that have are coming from a different orientation and operating from the lens of fear, not love, this is the first piece, is making sure that we can meet at a place of love, making sure that I can even go forward with the conversation. It's like, if you had to narrow down one thing that makes the world go round, one aspect of the human story that is the most important, 99% of the people say love. And if we can get to that, then everything else is just a series of questions away to a pattern interrupt of the old way we've thought about things, to a way that is more self-loving, self-empowering. And in being self-loving and self-empowering, you can only want that for others, because that feels so good. And to love yourself is to love others. And in fact, this old saying, you need to love others. If you don't love yourself, you can't love others. Nobody else can love you. I used to think that was so trite, but oh my God, that's so true. So we'll talk about how important self-love is throughout this. So if we can agree that love is our default, that it's physically built into our appetites of survival, that without it, we fail to thrive as a species. If we can agree that love is paramount to our survival, then we can move forward with the conversation. If we cannot, then I don't bother. And I know that there are people that I will not be able to meet in a place of love. They're going to come from a place of fear until that fear breaks down all of their ego structures and they can finally be in a place where connection is more important than the power that comes from separateness. All right, so are you ready for the healing conversation? And when I wrote this, I was in full mode, open channel, and it was in like my own belly, like, oh, wait a minute, not so fast, say the wounded parts, right? Like, it's assumed that everybody wants to heal. Well, I thought that about myself. I thought I really wanted to heal. I was doing all the right things to make it look like I wanted to heal. But holy cow, when it really comes down to owning your own healing process, you got to deal with all your demons about how you were wounded, why you were wounded. You've got all the victim story still there, even though your head may say life happens for me, not to me. But oh my God, the somatic memory of having your boundaries violated, having your psyche abused or neglected, any of the elements of our separation from our wholeness, it's not so easy to let go of those. It takes some work. And so people go off to the jungle in Peru and they do their medicine journeys, and they go to the clandestine places around the world and they find God through plant medicines, but then they come back and they got to live their real life. We've got a failure to integrate situation going on here, and there's going to come a shortage of medicine over the next decade, where people are waking up to the power of reconnecting with themselves without somebody else in their head. I was with a group a couple of weeks ago, and one of the gals just said, I just want to have a day where only I'm in charge. Only I'm in charge. And there's like a little girl in her physicality as she's saying this, like, somewhere in our childhood, we stopped being in charge of who we are. And so we got to go meet that little girl and that little boy and own the truth of their frustration and their sadness and their grief. And there's, oh my God, do you know how many days I cried? I screamed, I wailed. Oh, sitting in that chair, I wasn't in pain. I was in psychic distress, thinking, I've got so much work I have to do and I'm not doing any of it. And I feel so guilty. And week after week, I kept thinking I'm not going to be able to walk again. And I'm working out strategies about moving to a new house because this house isn't practical. And beginning to let all my fears just, and I was not doing any medicine. I was freaking out over this whole, everything just overwhelmed me. And then I had a revelation that if it weren't for this fall and rupture of the Achilles, I would never be still enough to do the work that I've been avoiding for a long time. So I, with gratitude, said thank you. And I sat and I cried and I wailed and I wrote and I did all the things that helped me get it out of the body into the universe so that I could look at it and really begin to make peace with my story, to heal my own personal timeline and not just intellectually get it, but to really believe what I know in my body is true. And so I bet others, when I say, are you ready for the healing conversation on the surface, go, yes, of course I want to heal. But, our addictions to food and sex and money and drugs tells me that the vast majority of us are addicted to something in our lives because we don't want to deal with this thing that is just screaming inside of us. And depending on how great the scream is, probably equates to how addictive the situation becomes for us. And so I have to come face to face with my story and my addictions and realize I'm not ready to heal. I'm not ready. That little girl in me doesn't trust that the grown-up on board can really show up for her. And so I began to say, well, what does healing really look like? What does it mean? Why is it important? Why do well, couldn't I just stop here? I get it. Do I really have to do the physical and the spiritual boundary setting and emotional reacquisition of my life from everything around me? And there's no shortcutting this. There's, when you begin to cross that Rubicon of love for yourself, there's no turning back. You get to this point where you see your own shit clearly, and then you can, the dissonance of not dealing with your shit clearly. you just, all kinds of stuff's going to show up in your field over and over and over again until you finally go, okay, I get it. So I had to have a pulmonary embolism. I've had 2 other near-death experiences. You know, I don't want to get cancer. No, thank you. Let's not put that one in my script, okay? But I got 100 pounds that doesn't belong to me, that wants to be released, and I can't release that until the little girl feels safe, and she doesn't feel safe because she doesn't feel seen, and she doesn't feel seen because although I intellectually understand that life happens for me, not to me, I have to love what happened to me. Oh, that one's hard. Tolerate it, explain it, understand it, but love it? Yeah, that's the tough one. That's the one. Oh, so many afternoons. Stephen would be out in the yard, and I'd just be sitting there going, I could kind of stop here. I could end it all. But something just kept like coming back like, no, you had the chance to say you were done when you had the pulmonary embolism, and you chose to stay here. What did you choose to stay here for? My loves, that's what you've got to answer. Why are you here? What is it that brings you fully present and in love with your life? That's the first question. And so I say to people, don't answer. You don't know. This one is a trick fucking question. Don't answer that one. Because if you answer it, you won't believe the answer. And this is why, the second question. Do you believe we can live in harmony? Every person I ask that question of, you know what they say? You know. I'd like to believe that's true. But everything I see happening around me makes me question what I know in my belly is true. See, we're reaching a point of disconnection that is so great that we are even afraid to trust that there is a higher knowing, love as our default operating system. Excuse me. This is what the 4-year-old knew. This is what everyone knows in their belly. That we are here to love and be loved. You bring a baby into a room, and it doesn't matter what skin color that baby has. Everybody, every parent, every heart opens and goes, oh. Why do you think we watch so many videos of puppies and kittens and anything that has innocence, nature? All of innocence brings us back into our own breath of love for our life. I didn't know how to love myself until I held my first daughter and realized, oh my God, she's perfect. And I was too. We all were, and we've lost track of that piece of ourselves, so much so that as the world becomes so crazed around us, we even second guess what we know is true in our bellies, that love is the only thing that's going to get us out of this. So we have to define what that looks like. We have to begin to believe and manifest what that looks like, because it is a choice to attach a meaning of meaningfulness to this life experience rather than a life that is meaningless. Why did we do this if it's to kill each other? Why did we do this? Why would we as human beings wired for love sign up for an assignment where there is no loving outcome? Of course there's a loving outcome, but we have to do it to ourselves first. You can't believe it's possible if you don't feel it within yourself. That's why all this projection of healing and putting power into others to heal us, it's gotta come from here. You gotta love yourself so completely that you just get to be, and that is enough. We stop the addictions to looking a certain way, being a certain way, being seen as, our addictions to our certainty about what this theory of everything really is, that there's a God, that there's a masculine, a dominance over a feminine. All of that is a man-made, human-made story that goes against everything we know in our bodies to be true. So we can't get to that. So I say, don't answer that one, because you are booby-trapped for failure around this question. You are so booby-trapped. We all are. We don't believe it's possible, so it will never come true unless we can answer this next question. What would we have to believe for us to live in harmony? Now, this is where hope meets the cynic. This is where those last bastions of imposter syndrome and who the fuck do you think you are, that you could have some divine understanding about how all this works. And I just keep defaulting to what I know is my physiological understanding of my world around me, and that is, without love, I don't thrive. My body has suffered because of the lack of self-love. And I can't heal unless I face that, unless I embrace that. And that's the level of healing that has to take place inside each of us before it can take place across the planet. Because can you imagine the amount of healing between races, between religions, between geopolitical powers, the amount of ego death and surrender to our physical manifestation of our spiritual expression is that we default to love, and love is the only way we all win the game. We came here to learn to love and be loved, and of the two, learning to love ourselves is so much harder. It's the hardest one, and it's the one that we create addictions to avoid. It's the one where we cling to the victim mindset, because to be a student is to have to let go of all the story, all the blame, all the projection. We just, this showed up as part of my storyline. Learn what's the subplot that you're missing over and over. And Edie, if you don't learn to love yourself, your body's just going to show you until you can ignore it no more. How many different ways does that show up? People ruin themselves financially. People ruin themselves with relationships. People ruin themselves with food and other addictions. We're all the same. We're just expressing it in different modalities. There's no shame. Oh my God, we got to just recognize we are a symptom of thousands of years of brokenness, baggage just layered on top of our shoulders. We'd have to believe that we all know this is true and possible. And we can't get to that until we begin to recognize that there are frequencies around us right now that want to cling to their way. They're fear-based, and we got to hang out in these upper frequencies by showing up with each other, to breathe together, to remind ourselves, to stay connected, to know our truth, to keep having the courage to unpack our addictions, unpack our story as fast as we can. We don't have time to go from ceremony to ceremony to ceremony. We got to show up in relationship with other humans and go, okay, give me your shit that you want to be held accountable for. Okay, what's yours? What's your story? What's your story? And help each other through this process as sacred witnesses, without judgment, without to stand in our truth without shame means we need to be witnessed in that truth. And so part of the movement of the healing conversation is we begin to witness each other in that breath, that top of the hour breath, that BELove, butterfly effect, love breath that we all take together, and we begin to see that feedback mechanism. This is why I did what I did for 30 years. I finally understand what my past life and why I was so in love with what I did before, but the old identity doesn't work anymore, but the knowledge comes forward. We're not losing anything when we move into a new movement in our lives. We get to bring all that with us. This is the piece. Our ego becomes attached to how we're showing up in a certain way. And that's not our attachment. Our attachment is in continuing to move to our highest expression, whatever that is. Thank you for hearing that. This power of 10, we need to have 10s in our lives. Here's what I mean by that. Years ago, profound moment. Tony Robbins, I know he's got all kinds of story around it. I don't want any feedback on that. This was profound for me. Messengers and messages need to be separate. If there's truth, don't discount the truth just because the messenger's flawed. We're all flawed. We're just trying to figure this stuff up ourselves as we're living it out loud. So make a list of the top 10 people you spend time with, and then assign the number 1 to 10 to them based on how much you admire them. Think about it from a vibrational standpoint, the people that make you feel really good when you're with them. Give them a 9, a 10. They don't have to be perfect human beings, but there is something about the truth that they're living in their lives that you would like to emulate. And then people less so get a lower number and down and down and down. When I did that exercise in 1993, my score was not pretty. 10 people times their number. And he went through the exercise. He said, okay, if your score is 80 and above, you are probably living your best life. You have surrounded yourself with people who, my words, not his, vibrate at a very high frequency, who continually elevate you by allowing you to be seen through the lens of love. I can't tell you how many sweet mentors have shown up in my life over the last decade who have witnessed me with such total acceptance. I never had that as a child, and so it has given me the tools to reparent myself. So we need to witness each other. We can't do this on our own. We come from a oneness. We are returning to a oneness in one sacred, holy relationship with another. That's what we're here to recreate, the oneness of love in physical form. And to do that, we have to revert back to the core of our physical being to remember who we are. So the third question is, what do we know versus believe? This is so powerful, you guys. This piece right here, this is where we unpack our bias. And bias represents believe it as so. We have to reattune ourselves to our inner guidance system to know what is true. And how to separate that from what we believe. Because believing something comes from outside of us. Knowing something comes from inside of us. So this belief thing, it is the basis of all the man-made constructs of separation in this world. Religion is a man-made construct. What I'm sharing with you right now is my version of my theory of everything, which is, we'll call it atheism, just for the silliness of that. It has nothing to do with me. Truth comes from our bellies. We know where it comes from. We feel it. It resonates. It takes us to that upper echelon of vibration, because it clears. It's so bright. It clears out the debris field of story that's still clinging to us. We've got to be witnessed in our absolute vulnerable truths and know that that's okay. To be witnessed is to be loved. One night with Mama Aya, she told me, Edie, you need a sacred witness circle around you because you need to be witnessed. And they even gave me the list of people, and those people came into my life, and I realized I was there to witness them. They were there to witness me, and we began to believe what we know in our bellies and let go of the things that we were told to believe outside of ourselves. We began to integrate and align with our own knowing. And that makes this question so tricky, because everybody gets to say, well, I know what it's true, and their belief is so certain to them that it feels true. And mine does too. My belief is so certain that it feels true. So then there's only one more arbiter that can determine what is truth and what is a corruption of truth. And that is our physical, biological bone knowing that we default to love, and that fear is the opposite of love. So if we think we believe something, just run it through the filter of, does it default to love or does it default to fear? Is it intended to bring us together or does it separate us? And if it isn't obvious as to which direction it goes, you need to ask different questions. It should be so obvious that the moves that we make, the laws that we create, the way that we treat each other, the human infrastructure that we must rebuild on this planet together, that we must default to love as our core operating system, that our institutions are there to facilitate that, to make love in the world. That is the movement that is asking to be witnessed right now. And so we have to understand what our bias is and what our truth is. In my experience, everyone will say they want to discover the truth right up until they realize that the truth will rob them of their deepest held ideas, beliefs, hopes, and dreams. Our curse of certainty. The freedom of enlightenment means much more than the experience of love and peace. It means discovering a truth that will turn your view of self and life upside down in an easy chair for several months. For one who is truly ready, this will be unimaginably liberating. But for one who is still clinging in any way, this will be extremely challenging indeed. How does one know if they are ready? One is ready when they are willing to be absolutely consumed, when they are willing to be fuel for the fire without end. Brothers and sisters, this is where we're at. Are we ready to be consumed by the fire of love? Are we ready to transcend where we are to be in service to the beloved? When I went on my walkabout last year, after a month of sitting in relative silence in my little motorhome, my big takeaway was, do you believe what you believe? Enough to act on it. Enough to show up in the world without reservation, vulnerable, zooming along with humans. That's what's being asked of us, that we show up in our lives. The greatest wonder of the world will not show up as a physical monument to human ingenuity. It's not what we do. It will be a movement of human integrity to live an integrated life, knowing what your truth is. Knowing what your truth is. Living your truth. Holy cow, it feels good. At the beginning of this year, my once a year word that sort of focuses my life, I asked for ease. I wanted everything to feel easy, because up to this point, everything had felt so hard. It's not supposed to feel this hard. It's supposed to feel like it's the most natural ease of your soul into the physical form. That softening of all of the story of identity of who we are into just being. And to love that so completely that there is no suffering in being. This is crossing the Rubicon of self-love. I see this in you, in the movement that you shared out loud, brother. And it has inspired me. And this power of 10, just surround yourself and shine light on each other. Just show up as a witness to each other. When Mama I thanked her for the sacred witness, and I said, it's the very least we can do for each other. And she said, oh no, my darling. It's the most we can do for each other is to be a sacred witness to each other's lives. For me, oh my God, I have this with my children. There is no greater gift for a parent than to know your children are awake and present in their lives and not subject to the chaos that's coming because you won't be here to help them through it. Parents, we got to clean up our shit real fast. We got to own the mess that we've made. We need to empower the younger children that are coming up behind us, our own and our grandchildren. This is a movement that's going to take so much momentum. We got to start now. And you got nothing to lose. You're in your 50s, your 60s, folks. Just let it all fucking hang out. Show up as you. Take your resources and start moving them around. Let's move our human resources in a way across this planet that starts to move the needle toward an awakening. The plant medicines, the light is coming forward. We have this relationship with Pachamama because she's bringing darkness to us because we are so out of balance. She's rebalancing us. And so this is where we have to just go all in on loving ourselves. That's the key right there. Just fucking Love yourself, because that's part of the plan. That's the fuel that drives the connection point again, where we begin to find the unity field here in the physical world, is when we find the unity field within ourselves, that we are in complete alignment with our own light. And until you get there, you cannot give love to anybody else, because you are not capable of it. The love you project out into the world is the love you are asking for in your life. When you can find it within your own source, oh fuck, now you got so much to give, because it's just self-generative. It is a beautiful thing. You don't get to have that though until you love yourself. It's an ingenious strategy that love only knows one direction: expansion, and it will bring us back to ourselves. My question is, do you want to wait until you're fucking miserable, or are you ready now? Are you conscious to the choice versus unconsciously buried in fear? It is so delicious. So delicious. And even then we question. So just believe as if. Just operate as if this theory of everything has some validity in it somewhere. Maybe it's just the piece about you get to make up your own theory of everyone and everything. Your big toe, if you will. How do we all come out as winners in the end? Is it aliens come? Does it happen because there is a Jesus Christ, but he loves everyone and nobody gets damned for anything because the amnesia is baked into the story? It's what we do with the amnesia that is the salvation here on earth. It's our heaven here. The choice to make meaning of love out of this human experience over projecting the fear out of us because it's just so against our nature. We project fear out into the world because we are not in alignment with our own love. So put your own meaning making to this. You decide. If there's a storyline that works better for you, that has gold shoes and white hats, and just know that your theory, as long as it defaults to love, lines up with my theory that might have plant medicines, it might have bells and chanting and ecstatic dance. Each of us gets to choose our light expression, the way that we create devotion to our own love is the mimicry of nature. That every leaf captures the light in a different way, is exactly who we are as human beings. We are here to create the unity field here in physical form. That's the story. That's all we got, guys. That's what we're here for. And so the biggest thing you can do is take this and fall in love with yourself. You do more of you, and the rest of this will follow. One of my favorite quotes, Buckminster Fuller, he talks about, you want to change something, don't change the way people think about it. Give them the tool, the use of which will change the way they think about it. For me, it's that top of the hour breath, that app that's coming, that we can all begin to see the connectedness, to take that breath with each other, to be sitting in a public place and at the top of the hour, notice 3 people take a breath with you. And know that everybody has resonated with this story, this theory of everything, that there's a piece of acceptance for everyone in this theory of everything, because love is the only rule. And what we came to learn was collective love. We learn it first in our most intimate relationships of our parents, hopefully. But if that gets broken, sometimes it takes us a while to figure it out. And those of us who are right on the cusp of stepping into our light, this is where you got to go all in on you. You got to trust that you are there for a reason. I wrote this yesterday. If you think about the tortoise and the hare, I am so hare. Like, I had all my kids at home, but I had really intense short labors. I'd have been done emotionally if it hadn't gone so fast. It's like everything in my life has caught me off guard to get my attention. I'm not very good at seeing consequences. I'm more the horse, the hare, if you will. Slow and steady wins the race, a pace unfamiliar to this thoroughbred. Once scourged on the stress of life, now resting in a pasture of sweet green grass. Alas, this new cadence brings a new radiance of light, easing into the spaciousness of sacred life, each day a movement, each moment a ceremony, each ceremony a new harmony, with the soul's desires no longer mired in the shoulds and coulds, retired to the simple yeses and loving nos. Ooh, that's been a hard one. Allowing flow, its passage of time. I'm here. Mama said there is no greater gift we can give each other than to fully witness each other. To see someone in their light, even when they can't see it. Somebody asked me once, how do you meet somebody who seems so closed off? I just look for their innocence. I look for the place where we can meet each other as human beings, not human doings. We need to find the innocence in one another, recognizing that we all got to where we are based on the lottery of our birth. Oh, I'm white and blonde and blue-eyed because I was born in a lineage, in a state, in a country. But I think I was also a goat woman in Africa once. I don't know, that my theory of everything hasn't developed so far as to figure out why I'm drawn to certain things and not others. But there is a curiosity about why we lean certain ways, and is there a question of some familiarity, some magic to the music of our lives, something mystical that brings even more sacred meaning to the experience. However we get there, as long as it defaults to love, then it's just part of the fabric. It's another thread in the tapestry. These are the golden threads of our shared human tapestry that bring us to our light. So all the ours is the only one-way religion stuff. Oh, it's so fear-based. If you come from a place of love, it only knows expansion and inclusion. It only knows connectedness. It does not know disconnectedness. It does not know. It does not manifest in fear. It only knows itself. Just love. And it takes time. You gotta love yourself over a period of time. This isn't a go away on a weekend, have a great experience. This is being witnessed in a community of love over time. And the beauty of Pachamama is she's gonna make us become more community focused. When we work on our light, we work best in a community of light. That community of light only knows expansion. And in that expansion, we begin to shift the energy of the boomerang to return home, where the default to fear feels silly in the face of so much love. It takes time. And it looks a lot like this, reclaiming ourselves. Love is a boundary. It's the boundary that defines who and how much you allow people into your lives. I read a beautiful quote about boundary is the distance between us where I can love us both fully. We're allowed to have boundaries with things around us. This oneness is a dance of learning to be in boundary with one another. And in boundary also means keeping our story in us without projecting it into the world with rage and fear. We need to do our work. We need to be in charge of the meaning that is associated with our choices. We have to trust that where this is taking us is exactly where we need to be, that the level of new trust in our higher light becomes so profoundly grounding and orienting to what is happening around us. I love this quote, let me fall if I must fall. And we do. We have to fall right now. We have to fall out of the old story to land in the new story. The one I will become will catch me. You are enough to ride you out all the way. I don't want to go out this lifetime feeling like I didn't go all in on me. That's what drives everything for me right now. Kind of a big Carl Jung fan, late to the party, but oh man, he speaks my language. Man lives at the boundary between two worlds. He steps forth from the darkness of metaphysical being, shoots like a blazing meteor through the phenomenal world, and then leaves it again to pursue his course into infinity. You are here to comet streak across this universe. Each of us, in our own way, is here to fully show up, to consent to the human experience completely, is to transcend our human story, our wounding, and our trauma. Do you want to be here? If yes, then the question is already answered. You are ready for the healing conversation. May it be so. May it be love. Aho.